So to give you a little background, the idea of Chassidic stories is growing out of the idea of a Malava Malka, because a Malava Malka after Shabbos, the time after Shabbos, is the changeover from the kedusha, from the holiness of Shabbos, to the regular weekday business. And there's a buffer time, which is the time after Shabbos, which we call Malava Malka. The Malava Malka is characterized by the meal, and I'm just touching on the little points here. There's the names of the meal, which are like the Malava Malka, what that is, the escorting of the queen. Its connection with King David, David HaMelech. Its connection with King Mashiach, Melech HaMashiach. Its connection with Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet. It's connected with music, and it's connected with storytelling. And these are stories about the Jewish tzaddikim. And this is where the stories come in. Its connection with one more thing, which is the luz bone. There's a bone at the top of the spine, which is called the luz, L-U-Z. Now, the Zohar tells us that every mitzvah has a corresponding part of the body, whether it's a limb or an organ or a vein, and the fulfillment of any mitzvah nourishes the particular part of the body that corresponds to it. So the Gemara tells us that the part of the body that's nourished by the mitzvah of the participating in this in the Malava Malka is the luz bone. So the special quality of the luz bone is that it's the last part of the body to disintegrate in the grave, if indeed it ever disintegrates. And therefore it will be the starting place from which the body will be really rebuilt with the Techiyas HaMesim, with the resurrection of the dead. When the time comes, and this is all detailed, and if you're interested, I can tell you the sources, like Gemara Sanhedrin 105a. So if you want to have a healthy resurrection, a healthy Techiyas HaMesim, you know what to do on Saturday night. And it's even more interesting than that. Not only is the luz bone nourished from the food of Saturday night, and all the different details that I told you regarding the Malava Malka, it's the luz bone is nourished only from this Malava Malka of Saturday night. So the Zohar explains that this means that unlike every other part of the body, it received no benefit from the eating of the tree of knowledge, by the sin of the tree of knowledge with Adam and Chava, with Adam and Eve. And therefore the decree of death that descended upon mankind as a result of this sin did not and does not apply to the luz bone. And this is why it's so resistant to decay and merits to be built, the building block of the Techiyas HaMesim, of the resurrection of the dead. And therefore you can say that the inner dimension of Saturday night is the rectification of the first sin of eating the forbidden fruit. And this is connected with the Malava Malka, and this is connected with the storytelling. The idea of Hasidic stories is a connection with a person strengthening his faith in Hashem. All of these stories that are Hasidic stories are all going back to the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples. The Baal Shem Tov, it's brought down that the Baal Shem Tov had 60 select disciples, but it's only recorded the names of 24 of those disciples. And those disciples include the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov. The way Chabad comes in here is that the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, he was the successor to he was one of the main Chassid, one of the main Rebbeim, one of the main Rebbes from the Maggid of Mezrich. And almost all of those other all those other disciples, all those other students that became Rebbes from the Maggid of Mezrich, there are only a handful of them that are connected with the Chassidic dynasties that we know of. So the way it relates to us the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who is the founder of the Chabad Chassidic movement. So I'll start you off with a story, and some of these stories are they're connected with a particular concept of you can call it even miracles. And the idea of a miracle is that a miracle is a revelation. Let me just enter some people here. Admit. So the idea of the miracle is a revelation of godliness, a revelation of elokus. And this is why it's above and beyond the nature. And this is where God is revealed by the revelation of godliness that takes place through a tzaddik, and the godliness is revealed, and that's why it's a supernatural occurrence. So some of these stories are not necessarily miracle stories. They're stories that displayed as particular Chassidic particular qualities of a person, and they're just natural stories, but they're amazing stories that they convey a certain lesson and a certain behavior. And other stories are above nature. And again, in order to reveal godliness that's involved in these stories, and that is something that strengthens a person's faith in Hashem. So we'll start with a story now. That's some of these stories are going back to the Baal Shem Tov and all of his disciples, and some of them are modern stories, many stories of the Rebbe. So this first story that I'm going to give you is if you want, I can name the stories in order. Sometimes I find that knowing the name of the story helps a person to remember the story. So this first story is called Tied Up. Now, I'll just mention to you that the sources for all of my stories are, there's two or three main sources. Number one, there's a 2-volume set that's called The Treasury of Chassidic Tales on the Torah and A Treasury of Chassidic Tales on the Festivals. It's by Rabbi S.Y. Zevin, and with a Z, and it's published by Art Scroll. Now, there's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yerachmiel Tillis, Tilles, and he has been telling stories for 3 decades in Sfas, in the Ascent Institute in Sfas in Israel. And what he did was he chose what are his favorite, what were his favorite stories from Rabbi Zevin's Sefer and a few other sources, but mostly from Rabbi Zevin's Sefer. And he published a book called Saturday Night of the Full Moon. And the second volume is called Festivals of the Full Moon. And those are the two main volumes. There's smaller volumes that are just paperback, but those are the main volumes. So let me just organize my books over here. And this first story was told over by the person it happened to. So he's telling the story firsthand as it happened to him. And after the story happened, he told the story over to the author, Rabbi Tillis in Sfas, because this person now lives in Sfas. And he told over to Rabbi Tillis in Sfas firsthand, and that's this story. And it's called Tied Up. So he's telling it from a first-person perspective. He says, I remember it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was Tuesday night after midnight, March 8th, 1989, when I had the strangest dream. The Lubavitcher Rebbe appeared to me. He was smiling, which is a wonderful sign. He addressed me by my first name, and he said, tomorrow you should wear a necktie. Now, even in a dream, that sounded ridiculous. I'm one of those yeshiva guys. This person that he was learning in 770, the yeshiva in Crown Heights. He says, "No, I'm one of those people. I'm one of those yeshiva guys who goes around with his shirt tails hanging out, and I can't claim that I put on a fresh, clean shirt every day either. I guess you could call me extreme in the way I dressed, and I should put on a necktie. I should wear a tie. That's preposterous." I thought that in the context of the dream, and even more so when I woke up, how silly this was. When I ran around the corner to 770 to the yeshiva at 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn to get on the mitzvah tank. Chabad has these mitzvah tanks that go out on Friday, and the boys go out. I say boys, they're late teens to early 20s, and they go out and put on tefillin on men, and they speak to women about lighting Shabbos candles. So he went around to board the mitzvah tank, and he says, I didn't tell any of the others about the dream. It was too ridiculous, even though the Rebbe was in the dream. On Friday, all the yeshiva students, they scatter from the Lubavitch World Headquarters in Brooklyn on the Tefillin campaign that points all over the city in order to encourage fellow Jewish males to put on tefillin and help them. And we also distribute Shabbos candles to Jewish women. And in general, we do whatever we can to be a helpful Jewish presence. Most travel by subway, but on Wednesdays, I also had a route in Manhattan with some of the other students, and we went there in a mitzvah mobile, or a tefillin tank, as we like to call the specially designed mobile home vans that we used. That Wednesday, as we set out, I briefly remembered the dream, and again I shook my head in disbelief. We drove to our usual station on 6th Avenue and 42nd Street, accessible to both the Garment District and the Diamond District. I strolled away from the tank a bit and began asking men that looked Jewish if they were indeed Jewish and if they wanted to put on tefillin. A few hours passed, and I was thinking about taking a break to get something to eat, when a man with an attaché case walks up to me and starts speaking to me in Yiddish, an old Jew. It turned out that this was an old Jew from Europe. This is 1989 now. This was an old Jew from Europe, and his attaché case was filled with, of all things, neckties. Perhaps you want to buy a nice tie? He asked. This is mishigas. It's nonsense, I answered, even though I immediately recalled my dream of the Rebbe the night before. The concept of wearing a tie was still much too foreign. What would I do with a tie? I've never worn a tie in my life. I said to him, look, look at me. Do I look like a necktie type of person to you? Still, you should have one, he insisted. It'll go well with your white shirt, and I have a very nice selection. I shook my head firmly, but at the same time, I began to question myself. First the dream, and now this. Maybe I really had to consider it. He continued to urge me, and I finally gave in. Okay, I'll look at what you have, but if I'm really going to get a tie, which I can't believe, I wouldn't consider anything except for what the Rebbe himself wears. What's that? He quickly asked. It has to be solid black, and 100% pure silk, I told him. Oh, I happen to have one just like that, he said. Let me find it for you. Ah, here it is. As you can see, it's of very fine quality. You have good taste, and for you, it's only $80. I burst into laughter. You can't be serious. Me spend $80 on a necktie? Even if I had so much money, I wouldn't do it. But of course, I don't have that, not even close. So how much do you have? I pulled out all the single-dollar bills and the loose change from my pockets. After a vigorous shaking, it produced another few nickels and dimes. I said apologetically, a bit over $5. His eyes opened wide. Well, in that case, perhaps you would like one of my cheaper samples. They're also very nice. No, I said firmly, like the Rebbe's tie or nothing else. He was silent for a minute, a thoughtful look on his face. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll give it to you for $5, but you have to put it on and wear it too. Uh-oh, I gulped. This was not turning out as I expected. I never imagined that he would give it to me for such a small fraction of the special price. I thought I was getting rid of him now, but now I was stuck. I can't put the tie on now. I don't know how to tie it. Don't worry, he said. I'll tie it for you. I was afraid he would say that. I gave him the money. He counted it carefully and then placed the tie around my neck and under my collar of my shirt. After some mysterious twisting and turning of the two ends, he was finished. He was finished with the knot. And he stepped back and said, "Ah, this is wonderful. It looks very nice on you, very becoming. Now you look like a mensch." I felt like I was choking. I figured that as soon as he went away, I would take it off. But it was as if he could read my mind. He insisted that I leave it on for the whole day, and I reluctantly agreed. He smiled, and he nodded, and he turned away, and he soon disappeared from sight. But then something strange happened. I had resumed asking the Jewish-looking men walking by if they'd like to put on tefillin. And after a while, I noticed that I was getting a much higher percentage of positive responses than usual. Could it really be the tie? I wondered to myself. It just doesn't make any sense. Even so, I somehow made an impression. It made an impression on me, and I accepted that I should probably leave the tie on. Another hour or two went by, and I had already forgotten I was wearing the tie. Then it was time to split up and make our rounds of the offices in the vicinity, where a number of the Jewish professionals were, and they were used to our weekly appearances. Many even looked forward to our visits. One exception was the staff of lawyers for a certain law firm, a certain law office, which was on my route. Although the non-Jewish lawyers were friendly and several of the Jewish lawyers were agreeable, the head of the firm would never let them take the few minutes to put on tefillin with us. He would complain about wasting time and getting upset at whoever let those people in. After a few muttered words of his to the staff, he would stalk away, and soon thereafter, I would be politely asked to leave. The situation got worse to the point that the reception people were reluctant to even buzz me into the front door. And many of the times they wouldn't even let me in if I kept trying. That day, however, they let me in immediately. But as soon as I entered, the first one that I encountered, before I could even say hello to anybody, to the receptionist and the secretaries, was the boss man himself. He gave me a hard stare, and he said to me, "You," in a loud, firm tone, and he pointed his finger directly at me. "Come with me, now." Uh-oh, I thought. It finally happened. This lawyer is going to call the police on me. There was no choice. I'd followed him into his private office. He closed the door behind us and locked it. I couldn't help noticing how fancy and expensive looking his office was. He tried making some small talk with me in halting Hebrew. He said that he had been to Hebrew University for a year in his college days. He was already aware that my English wasn't that great. I assured him that I understood much better than I could speak. He stared at me again, and then he spoke. "I want you to help me put on tefillin," he said quietly, with his eyes looking the other way. I couldn't believe what I just entered my ears. I must have looked like I was stunned, although it probably wasn't difficult for him to figure out how surprised I was. "I'm sure you want to know why today I suddenly agreed to let you put tefillin on me. I'll explain it afterwards." I nodded, and I quickly took the tefillin out of their pouch. I wrapped them on him, and I coached him in the blessings and in the recitation of Shema, in which the tefillin is mentioned twice. And when he finished, I removed the tefillin, I returned them to their place, and I looked at him, expecting some kind of an answer. He sighed, and he said, I'm sure you see me as a very successful person, but the truth is, I'm having a difficult time in my life right now. I've been having a number of personal problems, and lately I've been feeling that I could use some aid and advice, but I didn't know where to turn. Then yesterday, I happened to see one of the cards that you fellows left here with your rabbi's picture on it, and it struck a chord. I wondered if he could possibly help me. Now comes the best part that may be difficult for you to understand and believe. Last night I had a dream. I dreamt that I saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He smiled, and I asked him if he could help me. He answered, but I send you a few people every week. To which I answered, what, those slobs? They look like a bunch of bums. Who can respect them? None of them even wears a tie. The Rebbe smiled at me again, and he said, you want a tie? Okay, I'll send someone with a tie. And I woke up. So when I saw you wearing a tie, I immediately understood that the dream was real. I knew I should put on tefillin with you, and so I brought you in here. I hope that my situation will now improve. After that day, he began putting on tefillin on a daily basis by himself. And I saw that his personal and his spiritual situation definitely took a turn for the good. Even after I returned to Israel, I maintained close contact with him. We speak on the phone before every Yontif, and whenever I go to New York, we see each other. He seems as prosperous as ever, and even more so. Just this winter, 18 years after this story, he came to Brooklyn to visit me. And by the way, I continued to wear the tie whenever I went on a tefillin campaign. I consistently noted an increased success. And if you're wondering why the other students didn't follow my lead, it's because they never saw me wearing a tie, and I never told them about the story. I would put the tie on only when the other fellows were gone. I was too embarrassed to be seen wearing a tie. How embarrassing. If anybody has any comments while I'm talking these stories, please let me know.
Beautiful story, Oshkoya.
Thank you.
It reminds me of the dreams of Pharaoh.
Mm. You can comment more, Ben, if you'd like to say.
No, thank you. It's a wonderful story.
Yeah. I find that knowing the name of the story helps me to recall the stories. This next story is from this 2-volume set by Rabbi Tillis, and it's called Festivals of the Moon.
Festivals of the what?
Festivals of the Full Moon. Yes,
the full moon. Okay.
Yeah, there are 2 volumes of the full moon. One is festivals, and one is Saturday night. So this is the festivals of the full moon. This is the volume 2. I mentioned before that almost all the Chassidic stories are based on Chassidim. They were Chassidim, and these people themselves became rabbis, and they were Chassidim of the Baal Shem Tov or his disciples, or his disciples' disciples. This next story is called The Mistress of the Blessing Staff. In Hebrew is the Balas HaMakel, the owner of the staff. There was a great Rebbe that lived around, he passed away in 1850, and his name was Rabbi Meir of Premishlan. And he was a person who lived in extreme poverty. but he never complained about his poverty. He had Ruach HaKodesh, the prophetic vision, and he was a ready wit, and he became legendary. He wrote no works, but his teachings were collected and published by his Chassidim after he passed away. So this is a story that regards him and his daughter. His daughter's name was Rebbetzin Miriam Chaya, and they lived in Sukiva Shotz, which is the Bukovina region of the northwest Romania, and her husband became the first Rebbe of Shotz, of the dynasty of Shotz, and she remained in Shotz even after her husband's passing in early middle age. Now, the Rebbetzin was known as the Balas Hamakel, the mistress of the staff. This unusual title came to her by her Holy Father, gave over to her his silver handled walking stick before he passed away. This was understood to mean that he also transferred to her the power to bestow from heaven, from Hashem, to bless people and to help those in need of salvation. And indeed, it turned out to be true. The wonders of the Rebbetzin effected were substantial, even in comparison to those of the more famous tzaddikim and the miracle workers of the generation. Women and men, old and young, streamed to the door of this Rebbetzin, and she would bless each from the depths of her heart, and with Hashem's help, her blessings came true. Barren women became mothers, the sick were healed, and success attached itself to all those who turned to her. I mentioned before that one of the ideas of these stories of Rebbes and these miraculous things sometimes happening is that it reveals godliness and it strengthens a person's emunah, strengthens the idea of faith in Hashem. Now, once happened that the first Vishnitzer Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael of Vishnitz, was another disciple of a disciple going back to the Baal Shem Tov. So the Vishnitzer Rebbe, he came to visit in Shotz to spend Shabbos with his younger brother, Rabbi Moshe, who also became a Rebbe of the Vishnitz Sukiva Rebbe. Rabbi Moshe was thrilled with the visit. He made every possible effort that he could to enjoy, to make the Shabbos visit as enjoyable as possible. And for his guest, the whole visit should be as enjoyable as possible. But the Vishnitzer Rebbe was very careful because he wanted it should be clear that he was not just coming, he was coming to visit his brother. He wasn't coming for any other ulterior motive, such as visiting this woman, Rebbetzin Miriam Chaya. So before he went to visit her, he wanted to ask her, where did this power come? As great as she was, and as great as her father was, Rabbi Meir Premishlan, what other merits did she have? And he wanted to know, how was she able to give these blessings? He was afraid, the Rebbe was afraid, that if he went directly to this Rebbetzin and made a visit to ask her directly, it would be an insult to his brother. So he wanted to make sure it would be handled in the proper, sensitive way. He didn't want to go with his escorts, and he didn't want to make his brother think that this had been the main reason why he spent Shabbos in Shotz. So Rabbi Yisrael slipped out. He waited for his time, and he asked the boy to guide him to the home of the Rebbetzin. The elderly widow herself came to answer the knock on the door. Greeting her illustrious visitor with respect and delight, she invited the Rebbe and showed him to a comfortable chair. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the Rebbe came to the point. Excuse me for being so rude, but I'd like to ask you a personal question, if I may. Rebbetzin Miriam Chaya nodded for him to continue. It's known that your blessings affect miraculous salvations for people. In the manner of the great tzaddikim who draw great power from Hashem's Torah, they study assiduously. But how did you acquire the power to perform such wonders? My aunt, for example, is an exceptionally righteous woman, but she was the daughter of a tzaddik. Nevertheless, she didn't merit to accomplish salvation through her blessings. The Rebbetzin responded promptly. How did I? From Leibke Haganaf, Leibke the thief. The holy woman sat back silently, leaving the Rebbe to wonder at her words. What could she possibly mean? After an extended pause, the Rebbetzin smiled and explained. Every year on the night following Rosh Hashanah, my holy father, may his memory be for a blessing, was accustomed to open the window of his room and stand by it. The Jews of the town would file by, and he would extend his hand out the window for them to shake. And as they did, he blessed each one, Shana Tova, a good year. I was a young woman at the time, and I remember that many of the Jews in Premishlan were very poor. Some of them had turned to Geneva, to thievery, out of desperation in order to put food on the table of their families. But they stole only from wealthy Jews in the community. These rich men, in turn, hired a few of the town's poor Jews as watchmen to protect their property. She smiled and then continued. At least a few more Jews were able to support their families honestly as night watchmen. The most clever of these Ganevim, the most clever of these thieves, the one who stole again and again without getting caught, was known as Leibke Haganaf, Leibke the thief. Although everyone in town knew he was stealing, his skill was such that he never left a clue. One Rosh Hashanah, it entered Leibke's mind that he too would like to get a bracha for the new year, my holy father. Again and again, he would approach the window, only to back away, knowing that the Rebbe would never bless him. How could the Rebbe bless him? A blessing might be understood by others as a sign of approval of his professional. So what did Leibke do? He waited patiently until he was finally alone in sight of the window. My father was faced away, seemingly lost in thought. Leibke crept up to the window as only a Ganef can, and he touched the Rebbe's sleeve. Perhaps the tzaddik would fail to identify him and would bless him for a good year. But his plan did not succeed. As Leibke touched my father, the Rebbe, without turning around, he raised his voice in rebuke. It's not enough the whole year you steal the people's property in the town. Now you want to steal my bracha also. Leibke's heart jumped. His first instinct was to run away as fast as possible. But soon he recovered his composure and he said, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, Rebbe, that I would try to fool you. I simply wish to humbly request your bracha that if it so happens to be decreed in heaven on Rosh Hashanah that this year any of the residents of our town will have to suffer a loss of money through Geneva, through thievery, then let me be the ganef that they'll lose it to. You follow? Smiling with appreciation for the quick-wittedness of the would-be thief of brachas, my father turned to face Leibke. He extended his holy hand to him and blessed Leibke the Ganef that he should have a Shana Tova, a good year. Now the Rebbetzin paused when she was telling me the story. She paused for a few moments and then she continued. I had been standing close enough to see and to hear the entire exchange, although I was not in Leibke's range of vision. Taking note of the satisfaction that Leibke's words had brought to my Holy Father, I acted quickly. Approaching the Rebbe, I said, Tata, I also have a request. Let it be that if there are Jews upon there are such decrees that they need a bracha, and they need a Yeshua, they need a salvation, then bless me that their salvation, their Yeshua should come through me. Again, my father smiled and he agreed, and so he blessed me. So now, said the Rebbitzin, concluding her tale to the amazed Vishnitzer Rebbe, you see how I helped that I've given to so many Jews is all thanks to Leibke Haganaf, Leibke the thief. Shortly before she passed away, the Holy Rebbitzin requested that her father's staff should be buried alongside her, and prayed that doing so would protect the town of Utz. And amazingly, decades later, when town after town in this Bukovina region of Romania was torched by the armies of the First World War, only the town of Shotz remained intact. And the inhabitants of the town understood very well why. If anybody wants to give me any feedback or reactions or ideas of what they thought of the story, go for it. If not, I'll
Very
just
nice story again. You have nice stories.
I only pick the best of the stories. These are my stories. Yeah. I used to run Masiba Shabbos for the children in the community in North Miami Beach for about 14 years. I used to practice the stories of my family over a Shabbos meal, and then I would tell the stories to myself out loud as I was walking to the boys. As I was walking to the girls, Masiba Shabbos, which was always held in someone's house. And then I would say the stories a second time. First of all, I started on Friday night, I would look over the story a couple of times before the morning. Then in the morning, I told the story to my family. Then I would practice the story on the way to the boys as I was walking. And then I would tell to the girls, and then I would tell over the story to the girls. And then I was walking from the girls' house to the shul, I would practice it in my head again. And by that time, a lot of the children were starting to walk with me. So I couldn't really tell them the story out loud, but I would talk about other things. But by myself, if I was walking, I would say the story out loud to myself in my head again. And then by the time I got to shul and I did the Masiba Shabbos for the boys, each one was an hour long. I would do the Masiba Shabbos for the boys. And by that time, I really knew it well. And I would tell it to the boys. I didn't use any notes. I didn't use any book. As I'm getting older, I need a book to reference to make sure I don't leave out any facts. The boys David, would always, yes.
You're the only one that can make up a story about stories.
Oh, that's a good story. Sometimes the stories are what we call stories within a story. I would tell a story, and inside that story, things would happen where somebody was telling, and then the people involved in the story would say to the other person, oh, you're asking this and this? Let me tell you a story. And the kids would all chime in. This is a story within a story. And sometimes it was a story within a story within a story. And then and the kids would always ask me, they not always, but sometimes they would ask me, are all your stories true? And I would tell them all my stories are true. The only thing that's not true is sometimes I would make up the names. If I don't know the name of the person, I would say Beryl or Yankel or something like that. But everything else is true. And I try to put it in the context of whenever I told over this and this particular rabbi, I would try to give an idea of who the rabbi's teachers were. Like this and this person was a student. Before he became a Rebbe, he was a student of Rabbi Shmelke Milsberg, or this Rebbe or that Rebbe, and then who that person was a student of, and just to give them a background. So it just wasn't, pulling stories and pulling names out of the clear blue. of who these Rebbes were.
David,
Yes.
did you have enough stories for every Saturday, a different story, or did you have to repeat yourself?
No. I only repeated myself as the kids became older, because the age group, I did the stories for 12 or 14 years. And then the age group of the kids was basically from about 6 years old, when they were able to, to control themselves without getting wild, up until bar mitzvah, and the girls up until bas mitzvah. And as the things changed over, the new kids would come in, and the earlier kids would come in. And sometimes I would repeat a story. If a person heard the story when he was 6, now he's hearing it 3 or 4 years later when he's 10, he would remember the story, and then he would tell over the story. And sometimes I say to the kids, try to tell the story to your parents by Malava Malka tonight, and find out if they understood the story. And Rabbi Smith told me, like I would say to the kids at the end of the story, did you get the story? So Rabbi Smith said, he added something. He said, in addition to saying to the kids, did you get the story? He asked them, what did you get from the story? Explain to me back, what did you understand from the story? And this is a short story, and it's involving the father of this Rebbetzin that we spoke about, Rabbi Meir Permishlan. And it's called Don't Mix Up. If anybody has any questions or comments, please jump right in.
I'm not sure, but I think there was a Wichnesser Rebbe in a suburb not far from us, in the Chicago area here.
Very interesting.
Because my father-in-law, I think, got the blessing from him.
Wow. Very nice. What year was that?
Probably about, I want to say 40 some years ago, 30 some years ago.
So there's probably a new Vision Rebbe by now.
Probably, yeah.
Maybe not, yeah. So these stories by Rabbi Tillis, I mentioned to you that he's the main storyteller par excellence, and he tells over a story. At the beginning of every story in his book, he tells a biographical notes of the Rebbe that's in the story. He tells the stories related to such and such weekly Torah readings or such and such holidays. And at the end of the story, he tells the source. So most of these stories are translated and adapted by Rabbi Tillis from this 2-volume sefer that I mentioned before. It's called Sipuri Chassidim. In Hebrew, in English, it's called Chassidic Tales, the Treasury of Chassidic Tales on the Torah, and the Treasury of Chassidic Tales on the festivals. One year, at the time of the high holidays, the daughter of the well-known Tzaddik Rabbi Meir Permishlan fell severely ill. And it doesn't tell in the story whether this is the same daughter that was mentioned in the previous story or not, but it could very well have been. I mentioned before Rabbi Meir Permishlan, he passed away in 1850, to give you a little perspective. So 1 year around the time of the Yom Tovim, the daughter of the Rebbe became very ill. And as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur passed, her condition became worse and worse, and she seemed closer to passing Chas v'Shalom than to being alive. On Simchas Torah, Rabbi Meir was fulfilling the mitzvah to dance and rejoice with the Torah scrolls, and doing so with great enthusiasm as every year. Great happiness prevailed among all the dancers. But then a small delegation of Chassidim burst through the doors of the shul in haste, and they approached Rabbi Meir to tell him that his daughter appeared to be in her final moments, Chas v'Shalom, and the Rebbe should do something. The Rebbe hastened home and he entered his daughter's room. And when he saw how critical the situation was, he immediately stepped outside and he stood by himself. And then the Rebbe of Primashlan, he was very, very humble. So he used to refer to himself in the third person by his nickname. His nickname was Merla. And he would immediately stepped outside and by himself, he called himself Merla. He said, Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, you commanded us to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and Merla blew. You commanded us to fast on Yom Kippur, so Merla fasted. You commanded us to live in a sukkah on the Yontav of Sukkos, so Merla lived in a sukkah. He commanded us to be simcha, to be joyous on Simchas Torah, and the Merla is joyous. But now, Ribbon Shalom, you have made my daughter very ill, and Merla is obligated to accept this tragedy with joy. As it's written, this is a side note, it's written in Gemara Brachas chapter 9. It's written that a person is required to bless on something bad that happens to him in the same way as he's required to bless on something that's good. The Gemara explains that this cannot refer to the wording of the bracha since the texts are different. So it must be that this is our attitude. He's speaking all this to Hashem. And he says it must be that it's our attitude has to be the same. That is to say, to be joyful towards the bad news, just as towards the good news. So Merla accepts his daughter's illness with joy, just like you have commanded. However, Ribbon Shalom, there's also an explicit halacha that we're not allowed to mix and mingle one simcha with another. The footnote says, this is the source in Moy Katan 8b. So, for instance, you can't have a chasana during Yontif. Or it happened to me once that I found out that I became a chasan. And when did I find out? In the middle of my friend in the yeshiva, he had a party in the yeshiva because it was celebrating that he just got married. So in the middle of the simcha, I got a phone call. And the phone call was from my Rebbe and from my wife, telling that she just got an answer from the Rebbe, that the Rebbe gave his bracha to get married. So I went back into the room and I couldn't have this giant smile on my face. I had to pretend like I was just, happy for my friend. So I wiped the smile off my face. And then I went back into the room. And as the people were filing out the entire yeshiva, this yeshiva, we had all gone to the country for the summer. So I waited until the simcha was over, the meal was over, and everybody is filing out on the way back to their bunks, to their places where they were sleeping. And as they were almost all filed out, the Rosh Yeshiva was there, and I said to him, Rabbi Goldberg, I just got an answer to become a chassan. The Rebbe gave his bracha to become a chassan. So the Rebbe said, did you tell everybody? I said, no, I don't want to mix my simcha with his simcha. So he called everybody back. He said, everybody, Dovid Olensky became a chassan. Everybody come back. So this is a side note. So at the end of the story, Mayor Primosh states, there's an explicit halacha that we're not allowed to mingle one simcha with another. And at that moment, they cried out from the sick room that the young woman had broken into a heavy sweat, and her condition began to visibly improve before their very eyes. And after a reasonable time, Reb Meir's daughter recovered completely.
Very nice.
I'm seeing that it's 10:54, so I'm going to make sure that I don't get into a long story. So let me try this one here.
You're a good storyteller.
Thank you. In fact, there's another sefer that I'm using sometimes, and it's stories about the Rebbe. It's called Short Stories About the Rebbe. My wife likes this book because she's always looking for short stories. So she enjoys these. So these are some, not necessarily stories, but they're there are things that happen, and where the Rebbe says something, and a person understands from that that relating that situation of what took place, so to speak.
David, thank you very
Yes.
much, but I have to leave.
Okay.
It was really
Thank
good
you.
to listen to
Have
you.
a good week.
Thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you.
So we got another 5 minutes. So let's hop around. So this is a very interesting story. It's called Shabbos brings Yeshua. Shabbos brings salvation. This is a very short story. It was Shabbos in 770, and it was before the Rebbe became Rebbe. This is probably around 1949, 1950. And back then he was known as the Ramash. And he was having a farbrengen with a group of students in the yeshiva and encouraging them to teach Jews about Judaism. One of the students asked, "Is this realistic to have an influence on American Jews?" The Rebbe gestured to the yeshiva students to come outside with him, and they saw a Jewish woman carrying a nice fancy pocketbook. This is on Shabbos. So the Rebbe asked her, "Do you know that it's forbidden to carry on Shabbos?" The woman said, "I don't care." The Rebbe asked, "Do you have a son in the army?" When the lady answered that she did, the Rebbe told her, "Imagine that he's in great danger, chas v'shalom. Right now, and in the merit of this mitzvah, that could save him." This idea touched the lady, and she decided not to carry on Shabbos anymore. But that was only the start of the story. A few weeks later, the mother received a letter from her son. The son said in the letter, on Shabbos, and the son wrote the exact date on which the Rebbe had stopped his mother on the street in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. He said, on Shabbos, I went with my platoon on a mission in enemy territory in Germany. So this is obviously during World War II. The Germans identified us and started shooting at us from all sides. I thought that I would never see you again, and that you wouldn't ever hear from me again. And I was sure that these were the last moments in this world. But then, as I was internally saying these goodbyes, my goodbyes, backup troops arrived. These fresh, energized American troops succeeded in repelling the Germans and dispersed them in all directions. But as soon as I realized that I was the only soldier left from my platoon, I was realizing that I was the only soldier left of the entire battle. I told you before, I like to identify my stories by a name, so it helps me to jog my memory when I'm trying to recall the story. That one's called Shabbos Brings Salvation. In the 1960s, it happened that the Rebbe had a few moments where there were groups of Hillel students. This is like in 1970, around that time, when the Rebbe was more accessible because there weren't so many people that were clamoring to see the Rebbe, as many as later times. So there were groups of college students that were arranged to be brought in to speak to the Rebbe, so to speak. So during one audience with the Rebbe, a college student asked the Rebbe to explain the essence of a Rebbe. And this will be the last story. He said, explain to me the essence of a Rebbe. The Rebbe answered that a Rebbe is like a generator, and every Jew is like a light bulb. In order to live, we need vitality. We need life. What's the source of this vitality? The neshama within each and every one of us. The neshama is a light bulb, but the bulb needs a wire to transmit electricity. Without this wire, it cannot illuminate. These are the roles of the Rebbe, the Chassidim, and Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe is the generator, and we are all the light bulbs. We have to search for the suitable wires that will attach us to the generator. And with that, Be'ezus Hashem, God willing, we'll see how next Sunday goes as far as part 2. If anybody has any comments or any questions, please feel free.
Hi, David.
Yes,
Can you hear me? This is Ezra Levi.
yes, yes.
Yeah, no, I was getting some interesting messages while I was trying to connect to you about my Zoom version, etc. That's the reason why I had to cut it, leave, and then try and come back again. So if you can hear me, that's good.
Yes.
B'ezrat Hashem, I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Okay. See everybody this week, God willing, and everybody have a great week. Shavua
Yeah,
Tov.
Yitzchok.
You're welcome.
Right.
Wrote to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Wrote to you. Bye-bye.
Yitzchok.
Wrote to you.